Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Walters, and I'm a partner at Phillips Lytle, and I serve as chair of ULI Western New York. It is my honor to welcome you to today's presentation. Today's webinar marks the largest attendance ULI Western New York has ever had at one of our programs. For those of you who are members of ULI, thank you. For those who are not, I'd like to encourage you to join us. Through education, community outreach, and support, ULI of Western New York serves the Urban Land Institute's global mission of providing leadership in the responsible use of land to create and sustain thriving communities. We do that every day through outreach, programming, and support. Everyone who registered for today's program will receive an email with more details on how to get involved. I'd ask you just to take a minute to review that and please consider joining us. So I would like to thank Bergmann for really championing today's event, putting together all the details. This is a great panel presentation. I think you're really going to enjoy it today. I, of course, want to thank our panelists for participating today and our sponsors, Harris Beach and Herman Miller. So with that, I'll hand it over to Suzanne.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Adam has mentioned, I'm Suzanne Lefebvre, Project Interior Designer at Bergmann, and I will be your moderator. Quick housekeeping note, our goal is to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to submit questions. And if we do run short on time, our panelists have agreed to answer the questions after the event has concluded, and we will share those later. So let's kick things off and meet our panelists. We'll start with Michael Fraim. Michael, welcome. Can you give us a little background about yourself?
Sure. Again, Michael Fraim with CBRE Rochester, a commercial real estate, global real estate firm, and we run the Rochester operations. Opened the office about 23 years ago, and we serve all kinds of office, retail, industrial, investment type clients throughout the Rochester area, and then support from offices in Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, and certainly downstate.
Thank you, Michael. Kelly?
Yeah. Thanks, Suzanne. I'm Kelly John. I'm a senior interior architect with Bergmann, specialize in workplace design and also an adjunct instructor at RIT in the Department of Interior Design. And this semester, I'm teaching workplace design to the juniors. As which you can imagine, it all looks very different this semester.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kelly. And Andy?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am president of Galena Development. We're a local real estate development firm, primarily involved in commercial properties throughout Monroe County and further points west, a number of buildings downtown in the most recent arena here, but been involved in commercial real estate for over 30 years, licensed broker and an engineer as well. Thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And Shaul?
Hi, I'm Shaul. I'm a professor at RIT, and I research and ramble about workspace design, but I'm not a designer. I studied more from environmental psychology and how space is experienced, which should then inform design. So how workspace is related to relationship development, community building, and creativity and innovation. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to it.
Thanks, Shaul. Finally, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Osman. I'm the Director of Knowledge and Insight at Herman Miller. I spend a lot of my time focusing on workplace issues, healthcare issues. My doctoral work really has me focused on the intersection of architecture, culture, and behavior, in particular the spatial and visual organization of buildings. I do a lot of work on researching the impact of health in all those different spaces, which as of late has become all spaces. So I think we're gonna have a good conversation today.
Great, thank you. All right. So let's get started here. It's a nice general question for everybody. As you're working with your clients, what is everyone currently seeing in the workplace? Are people returning? Are they strategizing for a new work environment? Are spaces being downsized? And Kelly, maybe you can kick this off and talk a bit about the Bergmann Workplace Survey that you developed and some of the results that came from it.
Sure. Yeah, during the month of July, Bergmann invited business decision makers across upstate New York and Western New York to participate in a short survey, learn about their decision making related to COVID-19. And we have some interesting results, which may be relevant to some of our conversations today. So thought I'd just share some of the numbers that some of the data we collected. So 70% of businesses polled indicated that they are adopting flexible work arrangements moving forward. Responses indicated that business size may influence this. So breaking down our respondents by business size, it indicates that businesses with greater than 50 employees are more likely to consider flex workspace than those with less than 50 employees. We found that difference was 80%, 81% of businesses with greater than 50 employees were considering flex working arrangements, and only 60% of businesses with less than 50 employees were considering flexible working arrangements. But as I think a lot of us here would agree, the physical workplace continues to be important. A strong majority of the respondents, actually 88%, reported that the physical workplace continues to have some level of importance to achieve business goals. And only 12% of our respondents indicate that they have already had discussions about decreasing office square footage. So this is regional specific. So
yeah, well, that's interesting. I mean, that could speak to Andy. I mean, maybe you can shed some light on more of the building or your tenants. Are you seeing any difference?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting concept. The fact of the matter is, it's too early in the cycle to really understand what the long-term effects are going to be. Yes, it's very quick. We can all be very quick to say, hey, listen, I come in the office and there's only a third of the people here, and it's easy to assess that we should reduce office space. The reality is that may not be the entirely new normal. There will be some adjustments. There'll be changes. But as large employers look at their space, there's going to be some adjustments in a couple different ways. In one way, you can say that some employers may need more space for appropriate social distancing in the future, and want to open up their space instead of jam in the tight workstations and call centers, etc. The reality is it's still up in the air. It's still up in the air, and a lot of conversation about hoteling concepts that were popular in previous years but are coming to pass again. Thinking about, when I leave, just pack up my stuff and I'll be in 3 days and go to the same space that I'm going to be sharing with somebody. Interesting statistics that Kelly posed, and it's not surprising because we're seeing this. But if I can just stress one thing, is that this is an evolving conversation, and I don't really believe that the employers really understand quite yet the productivity and the ability of people to work remotely, efficiently on a long-term basis. Now, we're still in relatively a short-term basis, a number of months, but when you start to get longer term, I really believe, and I guess that's maybe me, I'm hopeful that there will be a robust office market in the future where people will gather, collaborate, and be much more productive on that basis rather than working at home. These Zoom calls are wonderful, but I've been, like so many of you, on a number of these calls, and it's just different. It's just different that we can't interact and have that quick response back and forth and understand what people are thinking in a very quick response. So, yeah, we have to be patient, and we're not going to make any drastic changes quite yet until the market talks to us. And that's generally what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to be reliant on these employers to tell us what their needs are going to be. So it's going to be very interesting in the next six to 8 months to really understand when leases start to come up and really reevaluate the need for space.
Michael, do you have similar thoughts or anything to add to that on the real estate side?
Yeah, well, I'll pick up a little bit on both Kelly's and Andy's comments. I mean, so the question was, what are we seeing in the workplace? Are people returning, strategizing new work environments, downsizing? And the answer, I think Andy's right. We're early, we're in maybe the third inning, but yes, all the above and more are going to be considered. And playing on Kelly's comments from her survey, CBRE has conducted very exhaustive and extensive client sentiment surveys with global real estate leaders and their employees, trying to understand where things are going at this point in time. And it's certainly clear there's going to be a big demand for a higher degree of remote work, and that the shift will have an impact on office utilization. But it's not going to be the end of office, we don't think, as we know it. Rather, maybe an accelerated fresh start, you could call it. It seems to me everybody's got big opinions, right? You go to sit down with a few people and you'll get as many opinions as there are people in the room. But certainly one conclusion is that the drivers to working within a company office have and always will be about the people. So again, office is going to remain as largely as we know it. And while we've all gotten used to working at home, I agree with you, Andy, completely. It's technology alone does not replace being in the office, working with team members and team leaders and clients. So that said, our surveys at CBRE show a real fast and growing desire for working from home. And the surveys have shown that we need to have more flexible work environments. I think a lot of clients are thinking about, 2 or 3 days in, 1 or 2 days out of the office. And I think the over and under on that is, while, as Andy said, maybe we are going to be less dense in the future, we'll spread out a little bit more. So that may require more office space with more people, more employees working from home. Perhaps it's a little less. CBRE's base case is that it really almost comes out neutral. It's about 2% less space requirement overall at this point in time. So big picture is, we're going through some rapid changes, but we're hoping they're going to settle out, and the way we use space will be different, but it won't go away.
Yeah.
And, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's going to vary a lot business by business, and corporate culture is going to dictate a lot of how much of the remote work is going to stay long term. I think it will stay. There will be a mix. But where, initially everybody thought it was great, why haven't we been doing this, is everyone stays productive. You're starting to see a little bit of the downside of that now, with productivity is starting to fall off a little bit, and communication struggling. And
right. Michelle, do you have any a national outlook on that, leaving off of Kelly's last productivity statement?
Certainly, I simply to echo both Michael and Kelly's commentary, I think that what you're finding locally is certainly happening nationally and frankly internationally. The thing I would like to comment on is this notion of an experiment. We keep hearing that this is an experiment. This is not an experiment. No one would say that World War II was an experiment, right? There is, and I can't even imagine designing such an experiment. So to say that, that in this moment where we're terrified to leave our homes, our children are with us, we could become infected if we go to a coffee shop. The coffee shop won't even let us stay there. And we're going to imagine a world and predict whether we want to stay home or move into an office. I don't think we can do it. And certainly just because everything is permissible or possible doesn't mean it's beneficial, right? So, you know, the beneficial side is something that we're going to see longer term. And we were even talking, you know, earlier in our pre-time here around, you know, the being all remote is one thing, being all together is another, but trying to mix that. It's really that challenging notion there, which is probably where we're going to land. But, you know, again, just recognizing that this is not an experiment. This is a catastrophe. And in that same way, you might ask, you know, the Britons during the height of World War II, are you satisfied with rationing only 2 days a week? Well, sure, they probably are. That's, you know, a very different conversation if everything opens back up and all of a sudden you want to ration. So again, you know, this milieu, if you will, of pandemic is certainly going to be challenging to predict how we'll be in the future once our fear has abated.
So,
Well, then,
can I?
Yep, go ahead, Shaw.
Just to add, I think the office space is not. So McKinsey recently did a survey to see how much the office or satellite offices are going to be used, and they're predicting that there is going to be a decline in about 12 to 9%, and on the real office space. I don't think the point is that office space is going to go anywhere. I think what COVID has done, it's really shown light on something that's been evolving, which is this large real estate, huge offices in urban area. I think that part is going to be questioned, and there is a need to Michelle's point that it's not an experiment, it is permanent, and I do think there is going to be a permanent impact in how you re-envision or envision what office is and what's the purpose of office.
Yeah.
That re-envisioning needs to take place. So this office is not going to go away, but as we know it, is being challenged. There are more than 50% of the employees, companies say that some form of remote working is going to stay. It is going to stay because the productivity hasn't really gone down. There was a large survey by Gallup where they looked at the productivity of people working remotely, and they're saying some 50% report that it's gone up or stayed the same. So then why do you need office? We do need office. This is not to say we don't need office, but to really question the purpose of office. I think that's what this pandemic is doing for us.
Thank you, Shaw. Well, talking then about the overall building space, and we'll talk about the design and interior in a minute, but talking about overall, you know, how will building owners and companies address the employees' health and safety within their space that supports both the physical and emotional safety? Are the concerns more weighted toward the logistics of the building, or is it more towards the workplace culture? And Andy, maybe you can share a bit about what you have done locally within your buildings, or if you have any future plans for building modifications, and to talk about maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of Rochester versus a larger urban center.
Sure. Yeah, I think to talk about what we've done over the past number of months is repetitious. Everybody knows what the protocols are, and we have porters that are cleaning space, especially in larger buildings. And so I think the reality is we need to make sure that employees are feeling safe coming back in. And that's when we talk about the psychological effect. We want to come back. Companies are starting to dictate that we want workers back in the office. But if our employees walk into the lobby and don't feel comfortable or don't feel that we have taken the proper precautions to prevent the spread, they're just not going to be feeling relaxed and comfortable getting back. So that's that psychological component. When you walk into our lobby of one of the buildings, wherever it may be, if you're not feeling that we've taken the proper precautions, that will be a problem. Conversely, if you walk in, our security guards are masked, there's sign-up sheets, there's stanchions directing people away, there's signs, 2 people to an elevator. When you enter a building, if you're feeling like, hey, we're doing the best we can from common spaces, I think that is our job, to make people feel as comfortable as possible coming back to work in our facilities. The next step is so much on the employment and on the employer side. There's just so much we can do, but you know, it's almost to a point, large companies are going to have trouble, and that's why they're going a higher percentage of remote. Smaller ones, I believe they're, and I'm talking to people, I talked to someone yesterday, a manager of a 52-person firm. They're mostly remote, and they're in a process of doing actual one-on-one interviews. What is bothering you? When will you come back? Are you comfortable? Can you come back 3 days a week? What is your home situation? Oh, you're living with an elderly parent. You've got 2 kids at home. I got, you know, all the pressure. So it almost becomes, and I hate to say it, almost an individual basis. And it's got to be very difficult. So I say, from a building owner standpoint, we can just do so much. We can hopefully create an environment where people feel safe coming in. But once you get within the workplace, within your office, I think it's incumbent upon the employers to really understand their employees' needs on almost an individual basis. So, and talking about building modifications, we're talking about doing some things, but I must tell you, we're not making wholesale changes. We're not going crazy in terms of these things, because that can be very disruptive too. And our hope is when we get on the other side of this COVID crisis, we're not doing things that would be essentially counterproductive to a building's productivity and to the workplace itself from an employment standpoint. So yeah, we're doing what we can and listening to our tenants and the employers. If we can help in any way, we're trying to assist rather than lead too much within their office space itself.
Thank you. And with Shawl, maybe you can offer a bit on the culture of wellness versus the logistical safety of the space. I don't know if you can share some insight into that.
Sure. So I'll piggyback a little bit back to my earlier question about what's the purpose of office space then. If productivity with the COVID, if people are working from home and remotely and they're still productive and they're able to do the focus work, then why do you need office space for? So I would say that you need office space for 2 things, right? So one is complex problem solving and collaboration that cannot be achieved easily when you're doing remote work. And the second is the social side. So again, another survey that was done, there was a recent, again, these are snapshots of studies, is so one of the studies surveyed what do people miss most about office space? Because they're productive, they're saying they're productive and the productivity is being keeping up. They say they miss casual interactions, their colleagues, and the social side to it, which is not, and which with time is going to creep up even more if you're going to stay remote and not see your friends. So there is a social aspect that office space fulfills. So I find it contradictory a little bit that office spaces are often designed for efficiency and logistics, even though wellness and all of those is part of it, that does go on the back burner, but that's what people are missing for. Or and that is such a crucial aspect of it. Again, I keep giving you these statistics, which I believe are important. It draws a point. And the epidemic of loneliness, which is in the US, it is being characterized as epidemics, is in part because of the remote work and gig economy. So there's the office space that plays that role, but we don't design it, or we do design it, but that's not the primary concern, especially when the budget comes in. So then what happens? So what do we do now? I mean, I would go as far as venturing and saying that we have to re-envision an office spaces in a way which is not a large real estate, but maybe like interconnected hubs of smaller spaces which allow you to collaborate, which allow you to do complex problem solving, but it also addresses social needs. But even more importantly, then you have an organization that is sort of spread in the community, and you allow community building too. So it's a neighborhood building. Whenever there is an office space, you have more restaurants, more of those coming up. So when you spread the office out in that way, it does require a little bit of re-envisioning and imagining what office space would mean. Not, again, to Andy's point, no wholesale changes right now, but I do think we're moving in that direction. I hope we are, where you really retain the essence of what the office spaces can really do, achieve, which is complex problem solving, collaboration, and social needs, without really focusing so much on efficiency. I mean, we don't talk to people who are more than 6 feet apart from us. Now we have to stay 6 feet apart. So I think so. I would say social needs and should be one of the primary aspects when you design an office, because that's what people, at least current situation, is saying that's what they're missing.
Well, you've just segued into my next question, which is speaking more about the interior design of the space in the long term. And so we could talk a bit about what we might see in the building and workspace amenities and design features that should be considered now to attract and retain not only the building tenants, but also employees. And as a designer, employee wellness has been integrated into our design process for quite a while. But not most of the time, but sometimes that goes to the bottom of the list due to budget. So maybe, Shaul, with your research in workplace design, has been focusing heavily on the third space. So that is the communal and the collaborative spaces. We're starting to hear the fourth space. So this is the new concept that brings, home, which we're all working from, the workspace, and now the social spaces. So if you can share some insight about the fourth space.
So co-working space is an example of fourth space, right? That brings things together. The idea still remains. People are, up until now, we are going to see an increase globally. So globally, we have about 1.2, 1.3 million co-working spaces. That's probably going to go up in the next few years up to about 3.5 million. So co-working space is going to increase. What I find interesting, if you look at, in a balanced way, the research on co-working spaces, why people go to co-working spaces, or why they are popular, it is not productivity again. It is, some of the co-working CEOs have said we are in a happiness industry. You go there because you're lonely. You're not going there to be more productive. In terms of, you're asking about the fourth space. So co-working spaces, if I think of co-working spaces, the benefits that are rising to the top, or the advantages of that, are of course professional. You have your professional network and you get to meet newer people. But then there is social side. People report, more than 80% of people report lower loneliness, greater happiness, as ability to seek help. What is even more interesting to me is that there are benefits for the organizations. Organizations who lease out co-working spaces, employees of those organizations report greater commitment to the company and are likely to stay longer with the company for co-working spaces. I find that very interesting, because a lot of times companies or organizations would think that if I don't have all employees, all of them at one place in this corporate headquarters, somehow we will not be able to retain them. But that's not what the studies are showing. So the fact that you can lease or rent out co-working spaces and still retain employees, because it gives them the legitimacy, it gives them the professional aspect or identity to what they are seeking for, and the social interaction. So co-working spaces are the future, but not the large co-working spaces. Again, I would be radical here, and I would say co-working spaces also need to be dismantled in smaller co-working spaces sort of interconnected in some ways. So I think
Kelly, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask Shawl if she sees that. I mean, it sounds like that would have the same benefits of working in smaller hubs.
yes.
It's working in co-working spaces that are, it seems like it's achieving the same thing.
Yes, it is. I think moving away from larger one place everybody meets to smaller hubs of either co-working, but co-working also becomes like it's like a destination office. So they provide you with amenities, they provide you with coffee shops. So it creates that culture. I mean, WeWorks is big on their culture, that's the culture you become part of. So yeah, it's the same idea.
And Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Certainly, the wellness side, in addition to creating that social connection, we're also now recognizing that the health of those people, the physical health, the emotional health, actually come together. And so in the same way, for a long time, we've focused on, views to nature, natural materials and finishes, the biophilia. I mean, that's real. So attention to finishes, attention to design does make that difference for wellness. But besides that, making sure that it's easy to clean. I mean, one thing that I'm delighted, if I may say, that COVID has brought us to focus on is the recognition that we become ill when we're exposed to other people who come to work when they're sick, and that our settings don't necessarily help us do the right thing. So when we think about employee wellness holistically, whether it's you are not encouraged to come to work when you're sick. Now that's not even a building thing, that's a culture thing, right? That's a process thing. We're hearing from our colleagues in Asia, and many of you on this call will know this, that it is unacceptable to come to work ill. In healthcare for years, we applaud the person that shows up, on death's door. If we are kinder to each other and recognize, oh my goodness, because we have Zoom, as much as we love and hate it, that it is okay and you can still be productive and sniffle in private as opposed to exposing, an entire workforce. So there are some definite benefits there, both on being able to attend to your personal health and your life by remaining home from a process perspective, but also a setting that allows you to do that. So yes to all.
Well, looking at maybe what companies are looking for now when they are looking at new spaces, is there more focus now on how employees will be physically entering a building and move around within the shared spaces? And are companies requesting health checks, touchless fixtures? Michael, as you've been working with your clients, do you see, or would see, or CBRE in general, do you see a push for smart building technology? In our smaller region in upstate New York, I have not seen a lot of digital access into buildings or parking garages or digital building systems for that matter. But will there be a push for this now due to its health and safety benefits as much as it is also efficient?
Yeah, well, a couple of you have mentioned it before. We tend to be a little later to the party in upstate New York on making some of these changes. I think that said, I don't see a lot of new smart technology. I think Andy referenced that, but certainly in restrooms, if you haven't already got the touchless faucets and toilets and so forth, I imagine a lot more of that's coming. Elevator controls, maybe much more slowly. But I think within tenant premises, employers will try to do whatever they can. I think a lot of that solution is going to come, to bringing, if you will, WeWork or co-working within premises, where you'll use new furniture systems, maybe Michelle can speak to, or configurations, and keep teams more to themselves, where they have their own conference room. Maybe they even have their own break room in that corner of the floor, so that not all employees have to go back to one central break room or one central or two central, conference rooms. And, I think to the psychological as well as the physical health, I mean, this is a lowest common denominator thing. If you've got this Michelle said, we used to applaud the people that come in at death's door and work, but these days, if somebody coughs, we all think much differently than we used to, right? And so I think peer pressures going to be a big part of it, and having to redefine how we use space and how we configure space, even within a tenant space, not even talking about the common areas, I think will all be part of the solution.
Thank you. Yep. And Michelle, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I love that you comment on that being a part of a solution, because one thing we certainly wish to avoid is hygiene theater, right? This is not where the look of the thing matters more than whether it actually works. Now, fortunately, it appears that SARS-CoV-2 spreads through the air and is not via everything we touch primarily. Now, once that starts to happen in the next pandemic, which I pray doesn't happen, that's a very, very different world when everything we touch is a potential fomite, right? In a way that has not been the case. And we're finding that masking is really the difference maker. So, when I start to think about whether or not everything should be touchless, from an experience design perspective, the touchlessness piece is ideally placed because it serves us best in that way, right? Should it be touchless because the experience is different? And in part that has to do with safety, but not completely. On the healthcare side, we've been touchless for years, and touchless through many ways, right? Touchless does not necessarily mean via eye contact or some sort of voiceover. Touchless is an elbow. There are lots of things that I think we can learn by looking at our healthcare brethren who have been doing and experimenting with the sort of interplay between the fallacies and the foibles of human behavior, which, we've known for a long time that washing your hands is the best way to prevent infections, but holy cow, we certainly have a lot of them in healthcare, right? So it's not so simple as to say, oh, it's touchless and you're safe, right? And that would be wonderful, but it's just not the case. And as you put it, Michael, the system of solutions that together manage to capture and direct us towards a salutary environment and work life.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add about that?
Yeah, I'll add a comment or two. 2 points in particular. The first would be access control systems. We're doing a lot more in terms of access control. So you can fob into buildings, you can fob on your elevators, for example, which will take you to smart technology will take you up to your floor. Starting to integrate some of those things. But I think back to the original question is what are tenants going to be looking at? I almost liken this to a number of years ago when before a tenant would move into a building and I would say larger companies, maybe more sophisticated, what's your green technology? What are you doing in terms of sustainability? Those are the types of questions. I think we're going to shift to questions of how are you going to keep my employees safe? How can, what are your cleaning protocols? What are your, your touchless systems? I think those kind of questions will now creep into RFPs and things that are going to be important in differentiating buildings when tenants are looking at options.
Sure.
Right. But that's also an opportunity to educate that community, right? And we do that quite a lot, and that's the hygiene theater piece. As you pointed out, you can only do so much in the lobby and sort of, public space of the building, and then it comes down to the individual employer. So, you can do everything that they want, and if they don't manage it at that level, they're not going to get the result. So it's nice to say, building owner, this is your responsibility, and now we can relax. This is a partnership, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point about the RFPs. They're going to be changing. It'll be interesting to see some of this reflect in that. So as we're wrapping up our discussion, the key driver in all of our topics today have been discussing the health and safety. What long-term wellness features will be or should be considered while designing a post-COVID workplace? And I hope all of you can chime in on this. But Michelle, with your background in healthcare industry and in design, you may have the deepest insight into this topic. I know we all spoke about this briefly in our last meeting, but whether it's a pandemic, flu season, or a climate-related issue, can you share some of your thoughts on designing for resiliency?
Yeah. So, resilience is really that ability to respond to that crisis and not just resolve it, but to be strengthened by it. So, if one thing that COVID has taught us is that, we are fundamentally animals, humans, who are at risk to factors we can see and ones we cannot see. And the ones we cannot see have come into sharp relief. And, fortunately for us, we have known for several hundred years, back to Florence Nightingale, how to ameliorate, those effects. And it is really down to things like air quality, right? Air exchanges and washing your hands and, these basic things that we were taught in kindergarten and somehow have forgotten. Don't sneeze in your hand, sneeze in your elbow, use a tissue, wash your hands often, stay home when you're sick, clean your surfaces. The office, the typical office desk harbors more than 10 million bacteria, which is around 400 times more germs than on a standard toilet seat. These are our known factors that we can really make a difference if we take the time. The economic cost of the common cold is estimated to be $40 billion, which doesn't even account for work days. So, if we have learned to take care of ourselves and be more thoughtful because we clean our surfaces, because we engage in hand washing behavior. For example, why are sinks only found in bathrooms, right? We need to wash our hands in lots of places during our everyday work. And yet that's the place where you find it in an office. So when we start to think about redesign, it is not only in your surfaces, right, that are easy to clean, but also in the opportunity, right, the affordance. You can only make it possible. Make it easy and make it possible to do the right thing, which is washing your hands when one can, cleaning those surfaces and engaging in those sorts of behaviors. Even if we go down to the issue of screens or cubicles, does that make us safe? Which, I don't think any of us know the answer to that. At the Environmental Design Research Association conference this past May, we had quite a healthy debate around the notion of does a cubicle where you have, assuming you have visual privacy, does it actually encourage less salutary behavior? Because if I'm not under the watchful eye of my colleagues, if I sneeze and I don't wash my hands, does anyone else really know, right? So privacy could actually encourage less beneficial behavior than we actually want. So again, this is multifactorial. We have a lot that we can learn from from Florence Nightingale, these basic things around washing hands, cleaning surfaces, and air, which is the one part we really haven't yet discussed. But air quality as not just being, staying awake because you have enough oxygen, but air exchanges to reduce particulate counts and what have you. So I'll stop there. I'd love to hear from the rest of the group.
Well, thank you. Kelly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, the basis of resilient design is, as Michelle said, creating adaptable environments that can respond to unpredictable situations. But it's also, how does policy and design work together? And Andy and Michael have mentioned this in terms of they can only do so much as business owners, but it has to do with a lot with the employer's policies as well. So, I think going forward, it's going to be a lot about designers and business owners working together to create holistic environments that not only change the functional or physical modifications, but also policy modifications for sick leave or remote work policies that are going to create, protect employee health and well-being better.
Thanks. Andy, do you have anything to add?
Not a whole lot. I just think there's going to be more of a sense of flexibility within a workspace, so you can adapt instead of built-ins and things, or maybe workspaces that can be easily moved around for flexibility, so you don't have, this rigid office structure. Once again, when we talk about this whole concept, I think that's evolving, and I think the creative designers are going to lead the way here and tell us what is going to be accepted in the marketplace, more so than us dictating. We're gonna listen to how these new workspaces are going to be designed.
Well, and no one's mentioned it yet, but does anyone have any thoughts on the outdoor space? and how maybe that will be utilized, especially on the build. Designers will have one way of looking at it, and I know in building real estate that will be something else. But we're seeing that obviously in New York. I mean, because of restaurants and things where people are utilizing the outdoors and in schools. I mean, climate related. I mean, that helps geographically where you live, and being in upstate New York, it might be a shorter time. Or are we going to develop spaces that can accommodate in the colder times? Does anyone have any insight or thought into outdoor? Or?
I will say that it's one of our biggest growing markets is work and in the outdoors. And even if in colder climates, this is not a San Francisco panacea, right? You can only do it if you have 70 degree weather. And I would only also direct our attendees to a fantastic article written by Jill Lepore just this past week in the New Yorker, talking about the sort of indoor-outdoor dilemma. And as humans, were we really built for the indoors? So it's an interesting sort of take on that perspective. So have a look. It's a great piece. It's called "Is Staying In Staying Safe?"
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's been interesting that our traffic engineers have been having some conversations about trends in their industry related to COVID-19. And since they're seeing much less traffic with employees working remotely, they're seeing much less traffic and commute times. I'm just curious to see going forward if there's any impact on parking requirements, and if there's any ability to free up open space that previously was dedicated to, meeting parking requirements.
I mean, Michael, is that anything that CBRE or anything locally?
Policy related to design. It's the same thread of conversation.
I think it has a lot of merit. I mean, I know they, like in New York City, tremendous amount of space, including sidewalks and streets in different areas, has been dedicated to dining and so forth. Now, that's a reaction in part early here to try and keep businesses afloat. But yeah, I think it could certainly impact parking demands. I don't think we're going to see that in the near term, but I do think that could be, again, part of the overall solution and mix. I do think we'll look at outdoor spaces differently, more creatively, and I think we'll think about the outdoors differently. I mean, we're just going into fall now, so this is the next phase of this COVID. Again, I agree with Michelle. It's not an experiment; it's a catastrophe. But this is the next wave of it. Now we got to go indoors. So how are we going to continue to use the outdoors to achieve some of those social interactions that we feel that we want to have, and outdoors will be more comfortable having them. So I think a lot of creativity will come as, again, I think we're in the third inning here, and we've got a long ways to go.
Thank you. And Shal, do you have anything to add?
Just a quick comment. I think I was very intrigued by Michelle's comment that we need, why are sinks only in the bathrooms? We need everywhere. We need to be washing hands more. Or I think a thought that comes to my mind is you can design a space and the design intent is not fulfilled because people don't use it as you intend for it to be used because they experience space differently. So with the safety regulations, with so much changing and in terms of how you would design a space, it's again Kelly's point about holistic. A lot of it is going to be not just policy, but the norms and the cultures and the role modeling that employers will hold the responsibility for is how you use the space. I mean, you can design space and it doesn't get used, and you can not design a space to be used in a certain way and it does get used that way. So for the design intent to be fulfilled, even with the safety regulations, you put 10 sinks and people will still not use it because it's a behavioral modification. So to realize design intent, and it's more, policies will go a long way, but the responsibility is on employers also.
But Shal, if I could ask a question, I wonder to what extent we teach people to use our buildings. So, when you come into any new nursing unit, you have I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks of training, I mean, and checked off on how to use said object. The building is that object writ large, right? How do we use that? What are our rules of engagement? And that's an opportunity for us to teach. Now, certainly not to say, as you point out, just because you teach doesn't mean people will do. But, you know, bringing that into part of the equation of this is what we've created for you. This is how you should think about it.
Yes.
Well, let's go and see if we have a question. I think we do. It's that my company is exploring growth in new markets, and prior to COVID, we're looking at opening small offices, but the points made about co-working are interesting. What factors should we consider now if we need to consider and choose between those options? Anybody?
I can take it. I can take a shot at it. I think the first thing you would, I would say one of the few things, or the first things you would think is, what is the nature of work? What is the nature of work? And what is it that you want to achieve through that? So it's not about efficiency and productivity. It is what is the nature, what is the unique aspect of your work that you want to achieve? If it's a collaborative, if it's a kind of a work which is that of a designer, you need to have a hub, you need to spread things out, and you need to work on those. So that's what would design. Is there an optimal size of what the size of the office should be? But I don't know of that. But the first and the foremost would be the nature of work. What's the unique patterns, unique things that you want to achieve? And the second would be the social needs. I would always, I think that's a missed part. That's why people want to go to work.
So when you're speaking of co-working, are you also speaking of co-working within a company?
Yes, I am.
Not just entrepreneurial.
No. I am speaking of co-working within the company, or companies that are creating their own co-working spaces. So for example, Bergmann, if it's a smaller company, if you had a larger company, it's 1,000 employees, can you spread it out? Can you create your own co-working hubs that are interconnected within the community? Yes.
And that's instead of having a headquarters or?
Yes. Instead of having a headquarters where everybody shows up all at the same time. Again, the point was being made about resiliency and responsiveness. The more flexible you are, more agile you are, better you will be in a position to respond. Wall Street Journal came out with an article today.
I saw it.
On Facebook. More than 400,000 square feet of space is a ghost town.
Yeah.
How much? I'm sorry.
400,000 square feet of open space, open office space that they designed is ghost town. They're allowing their employees to work remotely for now, until foreseeable future. So if you had a smaller place, it gives you agility and flexibility to respond.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I would add, Suzanne, to the question, in addition to what Shal said about, what's the nature of the work, how collaborative does it need to be, and so forth. It has to do with scale. Are we talking about a hub with 2 people or 20 people or 50 people?
Yeah.
Interestingly, in the CBRE sentiment surveys I mentioned earlier, right now, according to our surveys, 1 in 10 companies are considering leaving high density urban cores. So that's only 10%. However, a little over a quarter of them are exploring suburban satellite strategies, that some of us call spoke and hub. But to Shal's point, what's a hub mean? With one company, it could be 2 or 3 people. With another, it could be 200. So you gotta kind of look at the options based on the nature of the work, collaboration that's required, and the scale.
Yeah. Do you think our area could be in demand for that?
I thought we were going to get a big outpouring from the city after 9/11. I thought a lot of those big financial firms would want to go to quality of life locations. I do think that's eventually going to come, and I think the COVID environment and the sensitivities it's created, I think will make an opportunity for secondary markets and tertiary markets to attract workers those that, companies are allowing to work remotely could choose where they want to work. And now you've got municipalities and cities that are marketing to that very opportunity, trying to attract workers. If you come to XYZ city, we'll give you an incentive of, a cash incentive and other things. So I think upstate New York could certainly benefit from that with our quality of life and cost of living.
It goes, Suzanne, it also goes to the whole idea of people stay closer to their home cities or where they are, and you bring smaller hubs or offices there. It allows for community development, and too, because you bring in some restaurants, some ancillary businesses around that, like a street office kind of a concept, where you have some offices, but that it also allows for community building. So it's not surprising, it's interesting that the municipalities are marketing for it, because that would allow for community development for them.
Great. Well, we're closing in on our time. If no one else had anything to add, I just want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank Bergmann and the Urban Land Institute for hosting, and our sponsors, Harris Beach and Herman Miller. We will be doing the Herman Miller raffle next week, and we will contact the winner then. And other than that, I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.